Hello everyone and welcome to the 13th and final Mega Drive game dev tutorial of 2024. In today's video I'm going to cover how to use Aseprite to create level maps for the Mega Drive using all the special Mega Drive features, such as using multiple palettes within the same background layer, using different priority levels for different tiles, as well as showing you an easy way to produce level collision arrays. While these tutorials are normally aimed more at beginners, I know this is a topic that's really vexed even more advanced users who are actually creating games at the moment. Now, as I say these words, I know there are plenty of people watching who are thinking, hey, didn't you already cover this last year? And indeed I did, that's very correct, and I did it using a very neat little tool called 16 Tile. Well, at the time of making that video I was very happy to have a tool that finally allowed us to access features of the hardware which were previously quite inaccessible. As the year went on I had to create more and more levels for my Castlevania game. The various inconveniences and idiosyncrasies of the software did become more and more apparent. That led me to really have the motivation to create a new kind of tool which allows to do the same features but in a much more convenient way. However, before I go into detail about the various drawbacks of using 16 Tile, I first want to express gratitude to its creator Yuri Neri. As I said at the time, it was very difficult to access these features such as multiple palettes and priority and so on, and have a convenient way to create these level collision maps, so it really did help me in creating that Castlevania demo at the end of 2023. The 16 Tile tool was originally just a little tool for his own personal uses, because at the time I understand he was experimenting a bit with Mega Drive development, and seeing how so many of us were struggling with using the different hardware features of the console, he very kindly made it available for everyone. The level map creation techniques I'm going to show you today, they effectively piggyback off a commercial pixel art program called Aseprite. And of course, being a piece of software that's actually sold for money and created by a group of developers over many years, it's bound to be more rich in terms of features than a hobbyist side project is. Okay, with that caveat out of the way, let's now take a quick look at 16 Tile, look at what drawbacks we had using the software, using the tool, and then I'll take you on and we'll take a look at how we can now do these within Aseprite. Okay, so here in 16 Tile you can see I've opened up a little map I've been creating for my GG Shinobi remake project early this year. You've no doubt noticed that the map is only partially finished, and the main reason for that is due to the fact of how difficult it can be, or how time consuming it can be to create these kind of level maps within 16 Tile. The main issue is that 16 Tile doesn't really have any kind of copy or cut or paste or move functionality within the map itself. That means that each part of the map needs to be painstakingly constructed tile by tile, and once you've created part of the map you like, for example this second story of the building here, if I wanted to simply copy and paste what I already created above to save time instead of having to recreate every story tile by tile, then unfortunately that's not possible within 16 Tile. This can also be a big problem if you were to make a small mistake. So for example, if I happen to have made this pink building too close or too far away from the grey building and I wanted to move it a bit more to the right or the left, unfortunately I can't just take the whole thing and move it. What I would have to do instead is delete all the work I've done on the pink building already and then painstakingly rebuild it tile by tile all over again, which obviously seems like a big waste of time. And of course, apart from making mistakes, sometimes you just simply want to change the level design of a particular level. You want to maybe move a platform closer or further away from one thing or another to make it jump easier or more difficult, or there can be a variety of reasons that you want to experiment with your level design just to make the game more fun. Unfortunately, the lack of kind of copy and paste makes this very difficult, and having to carefully build everything each time definitely discourages any experimentation. Another big issue has been the lack of an undo button, so I frequently make these kind of mistakes as you're seeing here, and unfortunately if you haven't saved your work just before this happened, then you've pretty much ruined your whole day. You're going to have to start all over again from your last save point. As someone with a lot of levels left to do ahead of them, both in GG Shinobi and Symphony of the Night, these larger issues as well as the smaller ones really did make me dread having to go in and do all these levels over again, because even the smallest mistake can waste you a lot of time, and whenever you want to tweak something it's always very difficult to tweak. That again takes a lot of time. So the motivation to find a better solution was definitely there, but unfortunately tool creation in itself can be a very time consuming process, so I didn't want to do something that's going to take too much time. I wanted a quick solution. What finally spurred me into action were these two events. First of all, Aseprite officially released their version 1.3. The new feature which interested me the most was the inclusion of tile maps, which would make the creation of level maps much more intuitive. I said earlier in the video that one of the advantages of commercial software is the fact that they're much more motivated to make improvements in that new features, which is true of course, as this new update shows. Now, one of the drawbacks for commercial software is the fact that for more niche use cases, for example using Aseprite to create maps that utilize the Mega Drive's functions, then there's not so much of a demand for it, so the creators are not going to put as much effort into that as they would, for example, supporting their main user base, which I'm guessing is people using this software to create modern indie pixel games for the PC. Fortunately, Aseprite includes a feature where you can write some code of your own to add some functionality. Being aware of this, I thought it would be possible to probably create some functionality for the Mega Drive, for example using high priority tiles or even creating like a collision map. The second little push that I needed in order to take action was a video by a game developer by the name of Sevilla. As you know, I'm always interested in looking at new Mega Drive homebrew, and I've been keeping an eye on his game here as Retro Game Hunters. He already has some pretty nifty shadow and highlight transparency effects, and the gameplay looks quite similar to something like Zombie Ate My Neighbours. He is doing regular updates on the development of this game, so I will link to his YouTube channel in the video description, so I'll encourage you all to keep an eye on this one. One of the updates he posted concerned using Aseprite to create higher priority tiles within his level map, and that really interested me. I managed to get in contact with him and ask whether it was possible using his method to also get multiple palettes within the same map, and whether you could apply priority wherever you wanted, and also whether or not he had thought of a way to create level collision using Aseprite. The answer to all these questions was unfortunately no, but he did provide a copy of the script he was using to do the basic high priority changes. The programming language which these scripts in Aseprite use is called Lua. Now, I've never studied this language before, I've never used it before, but the script itself was quite short and the language looked pretty simple, so I thought, okay, using my knowledge of C and knowledge of the Mega Drive hardware, I think I can make some simple changes to this script and work things out. And to cut a long story short, that's what I did, and I also managed to create a second script to deal with the level collision. Okay, with all that explanation over and done with, I'm now going to give you a quick brief tutorial on how to use the Aseprite 1.3, how to use the new tileset functions to create level maps. I will then move on to how to create a level map using multiple different palettes. Next up will be how to use Aseprite to make certain tiles higher priority and certain tiles low priority. And finally, we'll end with how to create a level collision map within Aseprite. Okay, so this is Aseprite 1.3. Make sure that the height and width are both multiples of 16, so they affix the collision map we're going to create. And for now, set it as RGB and transparent. Next up, you can go to where it says layer at the bottom, right click and rename it. So I'm going to rename it to foreground. At the moment, this is just a normal background layer, so to convert it into a tile map, simply right click, convert to, and select tile map. Give your tile set whichever name you want and make the grid width and height both as 8. The base index you can leave just at 1. I think this dictates how tiles are counted, whether it starts counting from 0 or 1, so 1's fine. And where it says allowed flips, this dictates when Aseprite is counting how many unique tiles are present in your tile map. It dictates whether it counts flipped vertically and horizontally flipped tiles as duplicate tiles or not. So I generally select both of these options, and the advanced options just makes these options come out. So this is generally the best way to do it, I find. So click OK and we're ready to start. Just a quick note on flipped tiles. Remember that this designation is just purely for using Aseprite in terms of how Aseprite counts tiles, how many tiles there are. When it comes to importing the file into SDK eventually, SDK is going to make its own judgment, so it won't be affected by what option you choose here. I'm going to set up our color palette so that we have 4 rows of 16, and 4 rows of 16 of course represents the 4 palettes we have to use: PAL 0, PAL 1, PAL 2 and PAL 3. I'm just going to change the color in each line just so it's a bit more obvious where one palette ends, the next one begins. And at this point, I'd also recommend changing the color mode to index, because that makes it a lot easier to separate the palettes out to make sure that there's no mixing between the palettes within a single tile. Remember that the index color mode can only support up to 256 separate colors, and it's going to mess up the second half of the Mega Drive palette if you try and load this palette directly into where you're doing your tile set. So generally I think it's a better idea to create a second file with the 32-step whole Mega Drive color palette loaded, and then you can select colors from there. You can simply copy and paste them over into your tileset file. And of course it goes without saying that you need to make sure that that second file with the whole Mega Drive palette loaded is set to RGB color mode rather than indexed. Alternatively, so long as you've got the palette unlocked, you can simply go in and you can change the RGB values manually yourself. Fortunately, Aseprite isn't like 16 tile where you'll get some very strange color errors if you try to do anything except exact 32-step RGB values. When we come to import this file into SGDK will automatically snap the RGB values to the nearest 32-step RGB values, so it will take care of it for us. And of course, the actual output of the console on the TV is slightly different from that too. That said, I still try and keep the RGB values of the colors when drawing in Aseprite to 32-step anyway. There are already quite a few tutorials on how to create tile sets using Aseprite 1.3 online already, so I'll keep this quite brief, but you have these three options here where I've been cycling through. I think mostly we use the first and the second, but let me go through it here. So if you're creating new tiles, it's best to use the second option and then simply choose which color you want and start drawing. And as we draw, you'll see that once you take your finger off the left mouse button, it will create a new tile for you. You can see that the left hand side splits between our color index and also the actual tiles themselves. So if you want to create a new tile, make sure you click within where you got the index colors. And if you want to take a single tile and you want to like paint it onto your map, then make sure you click into the second box and then you can press B for the brush, and you can, just like in 16 tile, you can paint on a tile by tile basis. Just an extra tip for you here, if you don't like the grey background, you can actually change the colours of the grid behind it. Especially useful if you're using greys within your actual painting, your actual tile set. So you can go here, go to preferences, then go to background, and then you can change which colour you want the background to. For my example today, I'm going to leave it as the light and dark grey, but it is very useful if you find that what you're drawing is clashing with the grey background. Let's go ahead and create a second tile here. So we're going to create this plain blue tile, and as you can see on the left hand side is now added another tile. So right now we have two unique tiles. We have that weird kind of grey tile, and we also have this square blue tile. And again, if I just click within the tile area and then press B, then I can paint it wherever I want. If I go ahead and take another colour within the same palette and then paint it onto one of the blue tiles, you can see that it's created another unique tile for us. And that's exactly what that second tile creation option does for us. So if we take an existing tile and we alter it, it will add another unique tile to our tile set. If instead of doing that, you want to make sure that when you change, for example, the plain blue tile, you want every single plain blue tile on the map to be changed at the same time, then we can select the first option. So if you select the first option and start drawing into one of the blue tiles, you can see that it will automatically at the same time change all the other tiles, because it doesn't create a new unique tile, it will simply alter the tile you've already created. This option can be especially useful when your tile map is pretty much done, you've already created your level map and you just want to make some tweaks to certain tiles and see how it looks. Going back to the second option again, the second tile creation option, if I create this tile pattern here, you'll notice that it only adds one single unique tile, and that's because it's flipped it horizontally and vertically. It's automatically detected that it can flip it horizontally and vertically, which is exactly what SGDK will do too. And if I hold the control button, you'll see that it adds an X next to the tile index. If it adds an X, it represents that it's been flipped horizontally. Y next to the tile index number shows it's been flipped vertically, and XY shows it's been flipped both ways. Before we move on, I want to show you a quick real life example of managing palettes. So you can see this here, the background from my GG Shinobi remake. The background itself only needs 6 colours, including the main background colour, and that leaves 10 colours left over for use in the foreground as well. So the foreground here is utilising both PAL 0 and PAL 1. The fewer colours you use in the background, the more colours you have available to use on the foreground or even enemy sprites, for example. Now, it doesn't mean that any colours used in the background you can't use in the foreground too. If you take a look at these windows here, you can see that I'm using the same colour for these windows as for the sky. The important thing with using the same colours in the background and foreground is to make sure they don't blend into each other. And since the windows are embedded into the building, then I don't think it's going to blend into the sky, so it should be fine in this case. And I think you can tell that the rest of the colours in PAL 0 are being used for this pink building on the right hand side, and the left hand side building, the grey one, is generally using PAL 1. As always, when mixing palettes like this, and I can't emphasize this enough, you really have to be careful not to mix colors from one palette with another within the same 8x8 tile. It's especially easy to use colors from different palettes within the same tile by mistake when two of those palettes have the same color. So for example, you'd often have a black color both in the PAL 0 and the PAL 1 palette. I've actually made precisely this mistake within this level map that you're seeing here. Since I've already changed all the colours in PAL 0 to green, all of this tile here should be green, but you can see some of the blue colours from PAL 1. So what's happened here is we've got a black colour both in PAL 0 and PAL 1, and when drawing this tile set I've accidentally used the black from PAL 1 within a tile from PAL 0 with PAL 0 colours. So this will cause an error. What I need to do is I need to select the first tile creation option, which will change all tiles of the same type automatically, then select G for the paint option, and then simply make sure that we're using the PAL 0 black within this tile rather than the PAL 1 black. Now if I change it all to yellow, the PAL 0 ones, you can see I've fixed our problem. If you accidentally make this error without realizing and try to load the file into SGDK, this is the error message that will come up. You can see that it very helpfully gives you the X and Y coordinates in pixels of the offending pixel that's incorrect. So all you have to do is go back to the image and find it and fix the issue. I think the easiest way is to do what I did just now, just make every single color within a single palette the same color, and then you'll be able to easily see where you've got a mix match where you're mixing the colors from different palettes within the same 8x8 tile. Going back to our example, you see I've created these 4 little squares. Each of them uses one of the 4 palettes. So normally I think you're using maybe PAL 0 and PAL 1 for the foreground, and that's enough. Because we're doing an exaggerated example today, I've just chosen to include all 4 palettes within the same foreground, which will be a bit of unusual in practice. But you can see here that if I change colors of each palette, you can see that each of these 4 are using a different palette. Now for the background, we're using that Shinobi background, and PAL 1 is just for the foreground only, it's not using any other purpose. PAL 2 is being used for our Aseprite, which is Adam from Streets of Rage in this case, and 3 is also being used for the enemy sprite. So you can see we're just like we did with the background, with the sprites, you can also use the palettes, certain palettes for the sprites and background tiles too. After pasting all the tiles wherever I wanted them, this is what the actual map looks like in the end. So you can see it's a very kind of a basic map, but we're going to display this on top of the Shinobi background, and with 2 sprites on, the player sprite and the enemy sprite. Just save this as a PNG, make sure the color mode is set to index and that you've got no mixing of the colors between the tiles. And the end result will look like this. So for the background, we're using PAL 0. Then the foreground is using all of the palettes, so PAL 0, 1, 2 and 3. Our player sprite is using PAL 2 and the enemy sprite is using PAL 3. As usual, I have a download link for the project for Patreon supporters, but for everyone else, the code for displaying the foreground is exactly the same as when we did the multiple palettes within 16 tile, so just don't include the tile attributes. So as you can see, using multiple palettes within the same map using Aseprite is actually quite straightforward. You just have to be very careful when you're drawing the actual tile set. But let's now go ahead and let's do something a bit more complicated. Let's try and make this middle bunch of tiles as high priority so that the player appears behind them. Back in our level map, what we need to do is, in addition to the 4 rows of 16 colors we already have, each representing one of the 4 palettes, we need to add another 8 rows of 16 colors. Please note that you need to do it this way even if you're only using say 1 or 2 palettes within your foreground. Always have 4 palettes, each representing one of the 4 palettes, and then have 4 additional rows and then another 4 rows after that. So these middle rows, which I've coloured yellow, you can make them whichever colour you want, the colour's not important. They're not going to do anything in our particular example. It's the 4 rows after that, the pink rows, which are going to be our priority bit. Don't stress out too much about why things need to be arranged in this way. What I'm going to show you next is a practical example of how to make it so that some of the tiles, the background tiles, are high priority. What we need to do next is go down to where it says foreground and select new and new layer. This is going to be our priority layer, so you can rename it whatever you want. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to call it priority. The next step is very simple. Make sure you've clicked on the foreground on our tile set layer, and then make sure you're clicking within the color part where we created new tiles rather than in the tile area. And then select whichever tiles you want to be in the to have high priority, select them, and then Control C, and then go over to click on the priority layer and simply press Control V. This will have the effect of copying those tiles onto the priority layer. So if we then make the foreground layer invisible, you can see that those bunch of tiles in the middle have been copied over to the priority layer, and any tile in the priority layer is going to be the tiles which are high priority. So you can see it's very quick and easy to copy and paste whichever tiles you want to be high priority from the foreground to the priority layer. Next up, I think it's a really good idea to save the file as, and save it as an Aseprite file, because only Aseprite files, not PNGs, they support multiple layers, and then call it your foreground master. The reason for doing this is that the next step we're going to run a script which is going to merge these two layers into one, and it's going to set the priority, but that's going to be irreversible. So if later you want to go ahead and change the level design and maybe change the priority again, it's not going to be possible. So it's always good to save this as a backup so you can go back to it later and change some things around and repeat the process again if you need to. Next up, we need to right click on our foreground tileset layer, and we need to convert it to a regular layer. With that done, it's now time to run our script. I've included a download for both this script and the collision script in the video description, so go ahead and you can download those. And then once you do so, go to File, go to Scripts, and then select the Open Scripts folder. With that folder open, simply take the two downloaded scripts and copy them over to that folder. You can see that my folder is really messy because I've got a lot of experimental scripts in there, but you should have two. You should have the priority script and the collision script. Back within Aseprite, choose File again choose Scripts and select Rescan Scripts folders, and this will update so that Aseprite knows that the new script folders are in there. Those two scripts should now turn up in this little drop down box here. You can see I've got loads, but you should only have those two. Make sure that the priority layer is currently selected and simply run the priority script. If the script is run successfully, you should see that those tiles you want to make higher priority has now turned to pink. Please note that this time it was very quick, the process, because we're only changing a few tiles to higher priority. But if you have a very large map where you're changing lots of tiles to higher priority, it can take a couple of minutes. Just walk away from your computer, don't click anything, because otherwise Windows will ask you to close the process saying it's frozen or something, but it hasn't. Just walk away from the computer, leave it for a minute or two and come back, and all the necessary tiles should be changed to pink as you saw here. Next up, right click on the priority layer and select Merge Down. Now this is going to merge these two layers into a single layer. Okay, with that done, don't save the Aseprite file like this. Remember, you want to keep that copy of that file as a spare. Instead, save this as a PNG. So this is going to be your new foreground layer. So save it as a PNG, call it whatever you like. If you want, you can overwrite the previous one or call it something completely new. After loading our new foreground file into our SGDK project, remember that we're going to have it so that there's no tile attribute because we're not assigning the palette and the priority within SGDK. That's contained within the actual graphic file itself. You can now see the atoms appearing behind those blocks that we made high priority. Just as an aside, if you accidentally run that script on the foreground instead of the priority layer, then it seems to flip the priority ones. So the ones you put in the priority layer as high priority will become low priority, and all the others will become high priority. So that might be a useful little trick for you if you want to make lots of tiles high priority. Okay, with priority out of the way, now let's move on to making a collision array for the level. Just as with the priority script, this collision script was based off one I found online. Someone, I can't quite remember where I got it, but they were using this script to import graphics from Aseprite into the Game Boy for Game Boy development. And apparently for that, rather than uploading the image directly as we do in SGDK, apparently they need to provide kind of a text file which includes all of the color indexes. I already had an idea of which code to write to create a collision array, so I took that as an example and I just simply built from there. To do the collisions, you're going to need this collision file, this tile set I've created, and I will include a download link in the video description. As you can see, the color mode is RGB, and we'd only change that to index at the last moment. And we have these tiles here and these colors. Now how it works is we have this tile set made up of 16 by 16 tiles, because that's what our collision array uses. And just as with any tile set, you can paste the tiles one by one, or you can copy and paste them too. You can see that I have the S for a solid platform, so that's stuff that platforms that you can't fall through. Then the P is for like a platform tile where you can jump up through it but you can't fall down through it. Then I have ones for slopes and so on. The important thing to keep in mind to make sure that the script works as intended is to make sure that the tiles and the color indexes are in the same order. So you can see that the index number 0 of both the color and the tile sections, they're this transparent color, this transparent tile. But then we have the second tile, the tile number 1 is the S tile, which is a red color, and the second color within our index is a red color too. And the third one is the platform, the P1, which is green, and the third color index is also green. So these need to be the same order. What my collision script basically does, it looks at each tile, each 16 by 16 tile, it looks at the top left hand corner, then it asks itself, okay, which color index is this? Is it transparent? Is it red, green, yellow? And it'll simply write out the corresponding index number in that position. So from 0 for a transparent tile, then 1 for a red solid tile, 2 for a platform tile, and so on. And in doing that, it'll do that for each and every tile from left to right, from top to bottom, and eventually it'll write out an index for us, an entire collision array, which we can use in our SGDK code. Now, understanding all that is only important if you want to change things around. If you didn't understand, don't worry, just keep things as they are and it'll be fine. So how do we actually create a collision array? First of all, we need to go to the foreground that we want to create a collision array from, and make sure you're clicking in the color section, not in the tile section. Do Ctrl A and Ctrl C to copy it. Then we're going to go over to our collision tile set. Now, if you want to make sure that the size here is the same size as our foreground, so you click the C button and write the size, and then Ctrl V to paste it into the foreground layer. With that done, now click into the collision layer. Now the collision layer is the one which has all of the collision tiles, so select the tile, press B, and simply start pasting our collision tiles wherever you want. And since we're using Aseprite, you don't just have to paint them one by one, you can actually copy and paste whole chunks too if it makes it quicker for you to do. I'm going to place these tiles in a bit of a haphazard way, and I'm going to place even some slope tiles too and platform tiles, just to give you a demonstration that it's all working okay. So I'm not necessarily drawing the collision array as I would if this was a proper level. Just as we did with the priority file, I highly recommend that you save a copy of where you are right now, just in case you want to change the level design in the future. You don't have to restart all over again. So save a copy, it's an Aseprite copy, call it whatever you want. With that done, the next step is to delete the foreground layer so that you're just left with the collision layer only. And then go to the top and select the color mode and change it to indexed. Okay, so now you're ready to run the script. So just as last time, go to File, go to Scripts, and select the collision script. The very first time you run it, it might ask you some questions, whether it's okay to run the script on this computer. Just say yes, yes, yes. Then you should get to this screen, so select File. When you click Select File, you have to give the file a name. So let's call it collision, or whatever you want, collision array, and then write .txt for a text file, because this is going to output as a text file. Then click OK. If you then go ahead and navigate to where you saved the file and open the text file, you'll get this result. And this should be very familiar to anyone who watched the lesson on level collision last year. By default, I've named the collision array just collision_array, but feel free to change that to whatever you want. Remember, it's a constant, it's a unsigned 8-bit constant, and in the brackets is the size of the array itself, and then we have the actual array. If you compare it to what we drew, I think you should see that it matches very well. We've got the ones where the 1 should be the solid, and the 2 where the platforms are, and then the other numbers for the slopes. The only thing I would change here is to delete the final comma after the final number in the array, so this one here, as I've just done just now. It may compile just fine without deleting that final comma, but just to be on the safe side, just delete it. And with that done, you can simply copy and paste the array into your code. And finally, at the very bottom, I've got something called the length of collision array. So this is just the length of the array. Remember that we needed this value as well when we did our collision code, so you can use that number there pre-calculated in your collision code too. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. It was a long one for sure, but one that I hope everyone found very useful. Once you decide to make a game, you're going to find yourself spending a lot of time creating and altering levels, so making sure that workflow is very fast, efficient and enjoyable is really important. At first it might feel a little bit awkward creating all these tile maps, but once you get used to the functionality of Aseprite 1.3 in the process, once you've created maybe 2 or 3 maps, you'll find yourself getting into a good rhythm, and after that I think you'll find that creating levels becomes one of the most enjoyable tasks in your game making journey. With all these tools in place and working well, I'm really looking forward to spending the rest of the year, the next few months, creating levels for my various games, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. Speaking of which, later this month I will be producing a general channel update video where I'll cover what's going on with Symphony of the Night and GG Shinobi and my various other projects, as well as giving a update about what's going to be happening with all the tutorials in the future. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial. Thanks so much for watching. If you're interested in this kind of content, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
I'm interested in this.
And if you wish to support the channel further and want to get extra things, for example the code for each lesson, then I have a Patreon and any support is much appreciated.
You won't go unrewarded.
Until next time,
farewell.